Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast, podcast number 268. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the evening of Tuesday, May the 10th, from the Hampton Inn in Green Bay, Wisconsin. That's right, remote broadcast because I'm on the road this week. And I wanted to do a broadcast tonight. I read 3 separate articles in the Wall Street Journal today. I threw one of them out there on my Facebook page, and others just interested me just as much as the other article. And it has to do with going green and working remotely. 2 things that are, I guess you would say they're catchphrases, they're buzzwords, they're the sign of the times. I mean, going green. We need to get green. We need to save the planet. We need to save our resources. All of which are true. And there's the big argument as to, is it important? Is it necessary? Is it something that we need to do? Is it something that we should even really care about? But the one big factor that makes everybody smile, the industrialists, the people that use manufactured items, the tree huggers, the going green people. The one thing that makes everybody smile, that puts everybody on the same page, is when the green option is also the biggest profit margin option. And that does happen sometimes. Like I said, the essay today is going to be on 3 separate topics, touching on going green and working remotely. And they all have a bit of a twist. And the twist is, that's right, the pandemic. Because the pandemic changed everything. It changed the way people thought about things. It changed the way people did things. It changed the way businesses looked at things. Once upon a time, working from home meant you're just slacking off. Not so much. Once upon a time, rebuilding or remanufacturing a product just meant, okay, this is something that's you want new, but you can't afford new, so you're going to buy a remanufactured one. Remanufactured, reprocessed, repurposed, rebuilt, whatever. You can't afford new, so you buy the remanufactured one. It was almost looked at as a factory second, so to speak. But these articles that I read changed the way working remotely and going green changed the way they were viewed forever, mainly because it changed the bottom line. It's changing the profit margin. And that's when you really get everybody's attention. If you say going green, but the coal-fired furnace costs 3 cents a kilowatt hour and the solar-powered process costs 70 cents a kilowatt hour, nobody listens to it. But as coal becomes 5 cents and solar becomes 50 cents, as coal becomes 10 cents and solar becomes 20 cents. Now we're getting closer. Now you've got people's attention. Now it's a doable thing. It becomes affordable, okay? And the whole working remotely thing, I'm in Green Bay, Wisconsin, okay? And springtime has finally come. Last week it was cold, rainy, and in the 50s. Today it's warm and about 80 degrees. So springtime is here. Some would say summertime is here. And Green Bay, Wisconsin is a beautiful place. About 3 or 4 months a year, it's a beautiful place. The rest of the time, it's very cold. It's just cold here, okay? And one of the draws to Green Bay is, okay, it's cheap to live because it's cold. So you don't make as much money as you do when you work in Green Bay because it doesn't cost as much to live. So think to yourself, if I could work for a company in the area that pays a lot, but live in an area that doesn't cost a lot, isn't that the best of both worlds? It is. Once again, now you've got somebody's attention, because that means an employer doesn't have to possibly pay as much, and it means the employee doesn't have to accept as much if they're willing to work remotely. That's story number 2. Story number 3 also has to do with working remotely. But if you think about it, if you can work for a New York company but live in Memphis, Tennessee, the weather's better, it costs a lot less, why not? Take that one step further. I mean, you can accept a lower wage. The boss likes it because you can accept the lower wage. You can accept the lower wage because you don't have to live in New York City where it doesn't cost quite so much. Take that to the next step. You work for a company that's out of New York City or Silicon Valley or someplace else that costs a lot of money to live. But you live in Mumbai, India. Wow, you talk about a cheap place to live. Your employer can get somebody for a whole lot less money. Pay you a super premium, you can live like a king in Mumbai, India. So there's working remotely, and then there's working remotely. And that's what the 3 essays are. Actually, the 3 stories, 1 essay. The title of today's podcast, The Going Green and Working Remotely Twist, because that's what this all is. And the pandemic is what taught us how we can think outside the box, do things differently, because we were forced to think outside the box and do things differently. Now that the pandemic is turning into what some are just calling an endemic, sure, people are getting sick, but it's not as worldwide, it's not as spread, people aren't dying as much. Things are trying to get back to normal, but the going green stuff isn't going away. The working remotely isn't going away either, because we've learned that these were 2 things during the pandemic that turned out to be pretty doggone helpful for everybody. First story, Dateline, Corinth, Mississippi. Construction equipment maker Caterpillar wants to sell engines again and again. Even in my business, the ultimate green product is a product that could be remanufactured. In other words, rebuilt. Take an engine or something that's worn out, use most of the existing parts, just fix those parts up with new parts or remanufactured parts or remachined parts. And that's what Caterpillar is doing. Every day, old beat up, broken down engines from mining trucks and compactors return to the factory in Corinth, Mississippi to be inspected, taken apart, and rebuilt again as new. Now, this effort that in 2021 took an estimated 127 million pounds of equipment to be reprocessed is part of a push by the construction equipment giant to meet environmental goals and boost revenue from services, which is the big thing. Trust me, Caterpillar isn't doing this just to be environmentally sound. They're trying to make a buck in the meantime. Now, it's taking a product which is toward the end of its life, refurbishing it, and basically putting it back in service and extending its life. That's according to Caterpillar Chief Financial Officer Andrew Bonefield. From a customer's perspective, effectively, they get a refurbished machine almost as good as a new one at a substantially lower cost. Almost as good as new, a whole lot cheaper. Now, Caterpillar, like other major manufacturers, have been pressured by investors over the environmental impact of its factories and machines. The company, in 2021, made the remanufacturing operation into its own division and named its first Chief Sustainability Officer. Caterpillar now aims that by 2030 to increase its remanufacturing revenue by 25% above 2018 levels and wants to double services revenue by $28 billion by 2026. Those are big numbers, folks. Now, heavy equipment manufacturers have lagged behind the automobile makers in developing electric vehicles and other low-emission operations. Caterpillar and other equipment makers have said scientific and cost barriers remained for making batteries and hydrogen fuel cells capable of powering construction equipment and other heavy machinery. An internal combustion engine becomes much, much greener when it's remanufactured. I mean, a bulldozer, you can't make a electric bulldozer or a hydrogen fuel cell bulldozer. It just doesn't make sense. You can't get enough horsepower. But when you remanufacture that diesel engine, now you're talking a green machine. Remanufacturing engines at Caterpillar factories and rebuilding entire excavators through dealers will help the company meet growing demand among construction companies and builders for more environmentally friendly products, according to executives, while enabling Caterpillar to underprice competing products with remanufactured ones. That's a good way to get around the Asian imports. Remanufacture the good stuff. The remanufacturing business also helps Caterpillar ease the supply chain problems by giving them another option when new parts or machines aren't available. You just remanufacture what you have. Now, other manufacturers are pursuing similar efforts. Farm equipment maker AGCO Corp wants to increase its remanufacturing revenue by 150% by 2025. John Deere reported $360 million in remanufacturing revenue last year and has targeted a 50% increase by 2030. Now, at the Caterpillar facility in Mississippi, around 22 truckloads of used engines arrive daily from all over the world. Workers inspect the engines that might have spent tens of thousands of hours inside of a backhoe constructing homes or a backup power generator for a hospital. They then determine which engines can be remanufactured, and they send them to the factory next door or to one of the other Caterpillar remanufacturing locations throughout the world. Workers in the Corinth process engines from about 150 horsepower to nearly 5,000 horsepower, some of the largest models Caterpillar makes. Engines are cleaned, disassembled, and rebuilt with a combination of new and remanufactured parts. Now, just last month alone, workers in Corinth's large engine facility were replacing stainless steel inserts, or jugs, or liners, on a Caterpillar 3500 type engine, which can power mining dump trucks. It had shown up with one side of its engine block worn out. Now, in a process that Caterpillar has refined over the last decade, 2 millimeters of a nickel aluminum alloy are sprayed onto the iron engine, building up layers of extra hardened material. Half of the aluminum mix was then machined off, leaving an extra millimeter that allowed the engine to meet size requirements and properly seal. So in other words, if it's worn out, they spray it with a aluminum nickel alloy to be oversized, then they machine it down to the proper size. And voila, you've got basically a new machine surface, a new engine, except for it's not new. It's rebuilt. It's remanufactured. Now, as long as we can take out the old insert and remachine the surface, we can remanufacture indefinitely, says Dusty Bradford, a Caterpillar manufacturing engineer. He commonly works with engines built in the 1990s or even before. Now, Caterpillar fell short of its prior remanufacturing target, partially because of the decline in overall demand during the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's according to the company. And because Caterpillar stopped building on-highway truck engines also. But the failure was also because the remanufacturing unit operated within other parts of the company for about a decade, leaving it unmoored, according to Brian Edwards, who was previously an executive at Caterpillar's train locomotive business and now leads the remanufacturing division. Edwards says, "We need to have this division separated with its own focus and leadership and go after the growth side of it." Caterpillar executives said remanufacturing products can compete on price and performance with a newly produced one, with remanufactured parts being some 40% cheaper than equivalent new parts on average. 40% cheaper. Think about it. If it costs you 40% less to remanufacture, and you just charge 30% less,